When Shadow of the Colossus goes fishing, kaiju are on the menu. Armed with nothing but a fishing boat, harpoon, and a wicked throwing arm, are you ready to dive into this demo to face what lives below? Another game that came across my Twitter feed, it interested me to the point that I refused to watch any videos about the gameplay. What Lives Below is a pretty simplistic yet pretty ambitious project where some very decent graphics, interesting boss designs, and absolutely nauseating ocean physics combine to give a unique experience that I'm certain someone will comment and tell me about at least 5 obscure games that do something mildly similar to it. The game goes for a realistic style, if not high fantasy in its monster design, and overall simplistic. The monsters in this demo range from eldritch approximation of normal sea creature and octopus and bird, but very big. Your boat is certainly a boat, filled to the bare minimum of design, but functional nonetheless. Though I feel the perspective is a bit inconsistent, especially when you're inside the boat to steer. And with the impressively rendered and highly intimidating waves of the most tumultuous sea I've seen in a game so far, your view is about to get really rough to get a handle on. Sometimes the camera movement is so intense that you'll get a terrible angle of the sea instead of the monster that you're facing, and the boat will get tossed around so much you'll likely get seasick yourself. The character you play as must have tree-trunk-thick sea legs made of titanium. The music is used to a decent effect. I had it turned down fairly low, but it was easy to tell when it was kicking in. Often used to portend the start of a monster battle and let you know when it's on the attack, even changing up the tracks mid-battle as the boss enters a new phase. I'll remark that composition seems kinda all over the place. Chat seemed to like most of the tracks that we're playing, but the music ran on pretty short loops, and some of the tracks, like the first phase of the bird boss, sound less like a battle against something capable of laying waste to cities, and more like I entered its yoga studio. You'd expect the monster roars to be a bit louder and more punchy, especially if you've hit them in the appropriate spot, but not every creature affords you such luxuries. The game's concept is pretty simple. You start out by getting on your boat while the game gives you instructions and tutorials when the situation arises. Usually. Hopping into the boat, you'll head out into the open and very angry ocean to search out a blip on your radar. While the first boss is the only one that you seem to fight on the open ocean, where the radar thing makes a lot of sense, every other boss in the demo seems to exist in its very obvious lair. Taking on the bosses can be expectedly harrowing, but you'll quickly find a proper way to deal with each one when they're working properly. The first creature has some fairly obvious stab-me-here texturing going on with its head and tail. The second giant octopus boss is a lot less obvious unless you're paying attention to everything about it, all the while dealing with its frustrating arena, periodic grab attacks, barrage of rocks, and most annoyingly, a regenerative heal. Bosses 3 and 4 in the demo have a very weird way that you'll have to start the fights that aren't extremely obvious, and that could lead to frustration. Controls are limited to what you can do in the boat, which is basically throttle, steer, and adjust the radar. You must be grabbing onto the wheel in order to steer and control the throttle, which isn't always 100% clear if you're stuck in the heat of battle. This can frustrate further when you're trying to move the boat in a panic and assume that you've grabbed onto the wheel, as well as believe that you're actually moving due to the natural drifting of the boat and absolutely chaotic ocean waves tossing you about anyway, until you get blasted by what would have been an easily avoidable attack. It seems the game wants to go for a minimalist interface, but some HUD interaction as to whether or not the boat is moving would be appreciated, especially when the cruise control feature occasionally just seems to stop working. All attacks are done entirely with the harpoon, and your Zeus-level throwing arm is capable of sending these things soaring for what seems like miles away on a full charge. I did find the reticle a bit misleading, and oftentimes the harpoon wouldn't seem to end up going where I thought I would throw it, and not even in that I forgot to lead my shot sort of way. It might look like I'm missing out of bad timing in a lot of the footage, but I swear it's the way it feels when you're playing it, and that ended up causing most of my odd misses. The game also seems to ignore telling you that you have an alternate weapon option in explosive harpoons. These don't damage the monsters, but they will disable or destroy certain objects, and are vital for survival, as early on as the second boss. Since you can get through the entire first boss without knowing that you have them, I suppose they just forgot to include the fact that switching to these harpoons is simply done with right-click. It's far from the only issue that'll drag on the experience quite a bit. An odd hiccup is what seems to be character collision that would occasionally have my character knocked out of the boat. But instead of resulting in some kind of game over, it would let me freely walk around the ocean as if it was a solid floor. I was completely unable to return to the boat to control it, so that was a pretty bad situation if it happened on any of the more mobile bosses, but hilariously useful on the octopus, as keeping still seems more beneficial to the fight, and aiming was a ton easier when I wasn't getting tossed around by the waves or having to walk around the entire cabin to get a clear shot. The basics of most bosses in this demo, save for the first boss, do have a slight bit of puzzle elements to them. They add more to that Shadow of the Colossus comparison. While most bosses start by hitting them once with a harpoon, this doesn't as simply apply to the third and fourth bosses, as while you start the fight with a harpoon hit on the third boss, he'll just fly around landing on rocky outcroppings without even trying to attack you until you blow up the rocks next to where it landed. The fourth boss won't even start the encounter proper until you do something similar involving these arches that it's constantly swimming under. With what seemed to be no precedent to this, I spent most of my time exasperated at what I was missing, and annoyed to find that these oddly specific tasks were required. Some people might be into that, and it is fairly Shadow of the Colossus in that way, but I'd fare better with a more gradual introduction to features like that, especially since the buggy nature of the game would have me second-guessing as if I was just missing something simple. Either I wasn't understanding the puzzle correctly, or in the case of the last boss in the demo, it outright breaking by refusing to trigger into its next phase and rendering it unkillable. Most fights are spent either chasing down the boss, avoiding attacks, getting into the proper position, noting the boss's weak points, and repairing the engine when the boat's damaged. This is done by spraying down the box on the front of the boat until it stops burning or smoking. You can get a better visual representation of your boat's health by the row of lights that are near the wheel. I'm torn on these mechanics. The rapid-fire balance of movement, attacking, repairs, and positioning is stressful, but almost in a rewarding way. It's a chaotic dance that's fueled by equal parts strategy and panic, and oddly something that I can get behind. The main issue with the repair mechanic, though, is how simple it is to just heal tank your way through some of these attacks. It occasionally felt as if that was the expected way to deal with some of these attacks, as they felt completely unavoidable, which isn't the best feeling design choice if that's the case. As much flack as there is to give, I very much like where this is heading. It's an overall interesting design, with quite a few places that could add some polish. I think the game could benefit from more original, unnatural, or eldritch-inspired designs, as though the design of the first boss is pretty on point with what I would expect to be fighting, and the last boss did take on a very unexpected look that I found a bit of a surprise. The second and third boss are literally giant normal octopus and giant normal-ish looking bird. With bugs ironed out proper and some of the more obtuse mechanics introduced a bit more naturally, or at all, this is easily one to watch if anything that you saw in here interested you.